My name is Kathleen Anderson, but everyone calls me Kathy, and I'm 34 years old. The day I realized my own family saw me as nothing more than a live-in servant was the same day I decided to stop playing by their rules. It started on a Tuesday morning when I woke up in what used to be the hall closet, my knees pressed against the wall because there wasn't enough room to stretch my legs, listening to my sister Emma's kids running around upstairs in what had been my childhood bedroom for 18 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I pushed aside the hanging coats that shared my sleeping space and checked my phone. 6:30 in the morning, and I could already hear my mother Sandra calling my name from the kitchen. Her voice sharp with that particular brand of irritation she reserved for when she needed me to fix something she'd created. I sat up carefully, trying not to hit my head on the shelf above me where I kept my few possessions in plastic bins. And I felt that familiar ache in my back from sleeping on a mattress that was too thin for the wooden floor underneath. 3 years, that's how long I'd been living like this. Ever since I moved back home after my divorce from Marcus went through and left me with nothing but debt and a broken credit score. 3 years of being told I was lucky to have a roof over my head. 3 years of being reminded that family helps family. 3 years of sleeping in a space that was barely big enough for winter coats, let alone a grown woman. I pulled on the same jeans I'd worn yesterday and stepped out into the hallway, squinting against the bright overhead light that always felt harsh after the darkness of my closet. The house was already alive with chaos. Emma's 8-year-old son Tyler was bouncing a basketball against the wall of what used to be my room, each thud echoing through the thin walls like a reminder of everything I'd lost. Her 6-year-old daughter Madison was screaming about wanting cereal that we didn't have, and somewhere upstairs my brother Jake was arguing with his girlfriend Tiffany about whose turn it was to do laundry. When I walked into the kitchen, my mother was standing at the counter in her faded pink bathrobe, her graying hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, holding a cup of coffee that smelled better than anything I'd been able to afford in months. She looked at me with that expression I'd come to know so well, the one that said I was already disappointing her before I'd even opened my mouth. Finally, she said, not bothering with a good morning, "The washing machine is making that noise again, and I need you to call someone to fix it. Emma's got that job interview today and she can't be dealing with broken appliances." I nodded and reached for the instant coffee, the cheap kind that tasted like burnt water but was all I could manage on my part-time salary from the local grocery store. "What kind of noise?" I asked, though I already knew it was probably the same belt issue I'd fixed twice before with YouTube videos and $20 in parts. "That grinding thing," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "You know, the sound it makes when it's about to break complete. And while you're at it, can you pick up some groceries after work? We're out of everything, and I can't get to the store with my back acting up." My back was acting up too, from sleeping on a closet floor for 3 years, but I didn't bother mentioning. I'd learned that my problems were always smaller than everyone else's, my pain always less important, my needs always something that could wait until everyone else was taken care of. Emma wandered into the kitchen wearing a black blazer I recognized as one of mine from my old corporate job, the one I'd had to leave when Marcus and I split and I couldn't afford the commute anymore. She was carrying her laptop bag and checking her phone, and she barely glanced up when she poured herself coffee into my favorite mug, the one with the little cartoon cat that I'd bought myself for my birthday 2 years ago. "Kathy, can you watch the kids after school?" she asked, still scrolling through whatever was on her screen. "This interview might run late, and I can't have them walking home alone." I opened my mouth to remind her that I worked until 6 on Tuesdays, but she was already heading toward the door, calling over her shoulder about how she'd text me if anything changed. The front door slammed behind her, and I stood there holding my instant coffee, feeling like I'd just been steamrolled by my own family for the 1,000th time. Jake came downstairs a few minutes later, his hair still messy from sleep, wearing a t-shirt that had holes in it and jeans that probably hadn't been washed in a week. He was 28 years old and had been living in our childhood home for 5 years, ever since he dropped out of trade school and decided that manual labor wasn't for him. He grabbed a banana from the counter and looked at me expectantly. "Hey, can you spot me $40?" he asked, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Tiffany and I want to go to that new restaurant tonight, and I'm a little short. I stared at him, this grown man who was asking his sister who lived in a closet for dinner money, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I don't have $40, Jake, I said quietly. He frowned like I'd told him something impossible. Come on, you just got paid Friday. It's not like you have rent or anything. That's when it hit me, the casual cruelty of that statement. It's not like you have rent or anything. As if the fact that I was homeless in my own family's house was some kind of privilege. As if sleeping in a closet was a favor they were doing me instead of a humiliation I endured because I had nowhere else to go. My mother looked up from her coffee and gave me that look again. Kathy, just help your brother out. Family takes care of family. I wanted to laugh, but it would have come out bitter and sharp. Family takes care of family. Where was that philosophy when I needed help getting back on my feet? Where was that sentiment when I was working double shifts at the grocery store just to contribute to household expenses, while living in a space that most people wouldn't use to store their holiday decorations? But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out 2 20s from the small stack of bills I'd been saving to maybe eventually put down a deposit on a studio apartment somewhere. I handed the money to Jake and watched him smile like I'd just given him something that didn't matter, something that wouldn't set me back another month of living in that closet. Thanks, sis, he said, stuffing the bills into his pocket. I'll pay you back. We both knew he would. After they all left, I stood alone in the kitchen that had once felt like the heart of our family home, back when Dad was still alive and things made sense. I looked around at the dishes piled in the sink, the sticky spots on the counter where someone had spilled something and not bothered to clean it up, the stack of bills on the kitchen table that had my name on half of them, even though I had no say in any household decision. That's when I noticed the envelope tucked under the stack of mail, the one with the bank logo that I recognized because I'd been seeing a lot of those lately. I pulled it out and saw that it was addressed to Sandra Anderson, and even though I knew I shouldn't, I opened. My mother had been acting strange about money lately, more stressed than usual, snapping at all of us about expenses and cutting back on groceries. The letter was a final notice about the mortgage, 60 days to bring the account current, or face foreclosure proceeding. I read it twice to make sure I understood what I was seeing. The house we were all living in, the house where my mother charged me $300 a month to sleep in a closet while my siblings lived rent-free in actual bedrooms, was about to be taken by the bank. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the numbers. $12,000 in missed payments, $12,000 to save the house that my family treated like their personal hotel, while I got the broom closet and a monthly bill. My hands were shaking as I folded the letter and put it back where I'd found it. I thought about my mother's reaction when I'd asked if I could have my old room back 6 months ago, how she'd looked at me like I was being selfish and unreasonable. Emma's kids need the space, she'd said. They're going through a hard time with the divorce, as if my divorce hadn't been hard, as if my needs were somehow less important, because I didn't have children to use as leverage. I thought about Jake asking me for $40 while living in Dad's old office for free, never contributing a penny to household expenses, never even buying his own food. I thought about Emma wearing my clothes and using my mug and asking me to babysit her kids, while she went to job interviews for positions I was more qualified for, but couldn't pursue because I was too busy keeping everyone else's life running smoothly. And I thought about the $12,000, the amount that stood between my family and homelessness, while they treated my homelessness like an inconvenience. They were doing me a favor by accommodating. I went to work that day like nothing had changed, scanning barcodes and bagging groceries with a smile that felt painted on my face. But inside, something was shifting. Something that had been building for 3 years of sleeping in a closet and being treated like hired help by people who were supposed to love me. During my lunch break, I sat in my car and called my friend Rachel, the only person in my life who had ever acknowledged how wrong my living situation was. She picked up on the second ring, and I could hear the sounds of her busy law office in the background. "Please tell me you're finally ready to get out of there," she said without preamble, because Rachel had been watching me shrink smaller and smaller every month since I'd moved back home. "They're losing the house," I said quietly, checking to make sure no one from work was walking by my car. 12,000 in missed mortgage payments. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. And let me guess, nobody's told you about this. I found the foreclosure notice by accident. They've been letting me pay rent to live in a closet while the whole house is about to be repossessed. Kathy, Rachel's voice was gentle but firm, you need to leave. Today, pack your stuff and come stay with me until we figure something else out. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to hang up the phone and drive straight to my mother's house and pack my few belongings and never look back. But something stopped me, something that felt like justice waiting to be served. What if I don't leave? I asked. What if I stay and let them ask me to help save the house? What are you thinking? I was thinking about 3 years of being invisible, 3 years of being taken for granted, 3 years of sleeping in a closet while my siblings lived like entitled teenagers in their 30s. I was thinking about how quickly they'd all come running to me when they needed something, and how quickly they forgot about me when they didn't. I'm thinking it's time they learned what it feels like to need something from someone who doesn't owe them anything, I said. That evening, I came home to find my mother pacing in the living room, her face pale and drawn, while Emma sat on the couch with her laptop frantically typing something. Jake was nowhere to be seen, probably out spending my $40 on dinner while the house fell down around us. My mother looked up when I walked in, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Fear, real, genuine fear about losing everything she'd taken for granted. Kathy, she said, and her voice had a quality I wasn't used to hearing, something that sounded almost like respect. We need to talk. I set down my purse and waited, not making it easy for her, not jumping in to fix whatever crisis had finally caught up with all of us. Emma looked up from her laptop and I noticed she was still wearing my blazer. Mom got a letter from the bank today, she said, like she was delivering news instead of information I already knew about the house. What kind of letter? I asked, even though I could have recited it word for word. My mother sat down heavily in Dad's old chair, the one that had been his favorite spot to read the newspaper before his heart attack 5 years ago. We're behind on the mortgage, she said quietly. More behind than I thought. I waited for more details, but when none came, I prompted, how behind? 12,000, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. And we have 60 days to pay it or they'll start foreclosure. I nodded slowly, like I was processing this information for the first time. That's a lot of money. We've been trying to figure out where to get it, my mother said, and I could see her working up to something, gearing up for the ask that I knew was coming. Your father always said, this house would stay in the family, no matter what. The irony wasn't lost on me. This house would stay in the family, but I wasn't family enough to have a real bedroom in it. Emma closed her laptop and looked at me directly for the first time in months. Kathy, I know this is a lot to ask, but you're the only one of us with steady income right now. I almost lacked steady income from a part-time grocery store job that barely covered my own expenses and the rent I paid to sleep in their closet. Steady income that they borrowed from regularly, but never seemed to remember when it was time to make household decisions. What exactly are you asking me? I said, though I knew. My mother leaned forward, her hands clasped together like she was praying. We need you to help us save the house. I know you have some money saved up and with your job, maybe you could co-sign for a loan to cover what we owe. There it was. They wanted me to risk my credit, my financial future, to save a house where I wasn't even allowed to sleep in a real room. They wanted me to save their home while I remained homeless within it. How much money do you think I have saved? I asked. Well, Emma shifted uncomfortably. You don't have rent or a car payment, and you've been working for 3 years. I pay $300 a month to live here, I reminded her. In a closet. That's not rent, my mother said quickly. That's just helping with expense. What would you call it? She didn't answer. I looked around the living room where I'd grown up, at the family photos on the mantle that showed all of us together during happier times. Back when we were actually a family instead of a collection of people who happened to share DNA and a mailing address. I thought about my father, who had worked 2 jobs to pay for this house, who had always made sure I felt like I belonged somewhere. I need to think about it, I said finally. My mother's face fell. Kathy, we don't have time to think. The notice says 60 days, but that's just when they start the process. We need to act now. Then you should have told me about this when you first got behind on payments, I said, standing up. Instead of hiding it and hoping it would go away, I walked toward the hallway, toward my closet bedroom, but my mother's voice stopped me. Where are you going to go if we lose the house? She asked, and there was something sharp in her tone now, something that sounded like a threat. You can't afford a place on your own. I turned back to look at her, this woman who had given birth to me and raised me, and was now essentially blackmailing me into saving her house by reminding me of my own homelessness. I guess we'll all find out together. That night, lying on my thin mattress with coats hanging above my head, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to save their house. I wasn't going to co-sign their loan or empty my savings account or sacrifice my future to fix their mistake. But I wasn't going to leave, either. I was going to stay and watch them squirm. I was going to let them beg and plead and promise me things they'd never follow through on. I was going to make them face the consequences of treating me like a second-class citizen in my own family. And when they finally lost the house, when they finally understood what it felt like to be homeless and desperate and dependent on other people's kindness, maybe then they'd understand what they'd put me through for 3 years. I reached for my phone and texted Rachel, I'm staying. It's time they learned what it's like to need me more than I need them. Her response came back quickly. Are you sure about this? I looked around my closet bedroom, at the plastic bins that held my entire life, at the narrow space that had been my whole world for so long. Tomorrow, I would start making them understand exactly how much they'd taken me for granted. Tomorrow, I would stop being the family member who fixed everyone else's problems, and start being the one who watched them fix their own. I've never been more sure of anything, I typed back. The next morning started exactly like every other morning for the past 3 years, except this time I wasn't rushing to solve everyone else's problem. I woke up in my closet, got dressed in the dark, and walked to the kitchen where my mother was already waiting with her coffee and her expectant expression. Did you think about what we discussed? She asked before I'd even reached for the instant coffee. I did, I said, taking my time with the coffee preparation, enjoying the way she leaned forward anxiously. And, I'm not going to help you save the house. The words hung in the air like smoke. My mother's face went through several different expressions before settling on disbelief. What do you mean you're not going to help? I sat down across from her with my coffee, meeting her eyes directly. I mean exactly what I said. I'm not co-signing any loans. I'm not emptying my savings account. And I'm not taking on debt to fix a problem you create. Emma appeared in the doorway, still wearing my blazer, her hair messy from sleep. What's going on? Your sister says she won't help us save the house, my mother said, her voice rising with each word. Emma stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Kathy, this is your home too. No, I said calmly. This is your home. I live in a closet and pay rent for the privilege. That's not fair, Emma protested. We've given you a place to stay when you had nowhere else to go. You've given me a closet to sleep in and a monthly bill, I corrected. There's a difference. Jake chose that moment to wander downstairs, drawn by the sound of raised voices. He looked around at all of us, and seemed to sense the tension immediately. What's happening? Kathy won't help us with the mortgage, Emma said, like she was tattling to a parent. Jake frowned at me. Why not? Your family, that word again. Family. The magic word they used whenever they needed something from me, but never when I needed something from them. Where was family when I asked for my bedroom back? I asked where was family when I was working double shifts to help pay your bill? Where was family when Emma took my job interview clothes without asking? That's different, Emma said quickly. These are emergencies. My homelessness isn't an emergency. You're not homeless, my mother snapped. You have a roof over your head. I sleep in a closet, I said, enunciating each word clearly. I have no privacy, no space, no say in any household decisions, but I pay rent, like a tenant, and get treated like hired help. If that's not homeless, it's close enough. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of the refrigerator humming, and the neighbor's dog barking outside. I could see them all processing what I'd said, trying to figure out how to argue with the truth. Finally my mother spoke, her voice softer but with an edge of desperation. Kathy, we can work something out. Maybe we can give you the guest room upstairs. You mean Jake's room? Jake started to protest, but my mother held up her hand. We can figure out new arrangements. The important thing is saving the house. I took a sip of my coffee and let them wait for my response. This was what I'd been waiting for, the moment when they finally offered me something I'd been asking for, but only because they needed something from me first. What guest room? I asked. Jake lives in the guest room. Has for 5 years. I can move into the basement, Jake said reluctantly, and I could tell the words tasted bitter in his mouth. The basement with no windows and the water stain on the ceiling. He nodded, clearly hoping that would be enough to change my mind. So you're offering me Jake's room in exchange for saving your house, I said slowly. The room I should have been given 3 years ago when I moved back home. We're offering you a better living situation, Emma said. Plus you'd be saving your own home too. This isn't my home, I said, standing up. This is the place where I pay rent to be ignored and taken advantage of. My home would be somewhere I'm treated like I belong. I walked toward the door, grabbing my purse and keys. I was going to be late for work, but I didn't care. This conversation had been 3 years in the making. Where are you going? My mother called after me. To work, I said. To my job, that you think should fund your mistakes. Kathy, wait. Emma followed me to the door. Let's talk about this rationally. I turned back to look at her, this sister who had taken my room, my clothes, my belongings, my space, and was now asking me to save her from the consequences of our mother's financial irresponsibility. I am being rational, I said. For the first time in 3 years I'm thinking rationally about what's best for me instead of what's best for everyone else. I left them standing in the doorway and drove to work with a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. I knew they'd spend the day trying to figure out how to change my mind, how to manipulate me into saving them. I knew they'd probably call me selfish and ungrateful and worse, but I also knew that for the first time since I'd moved back home, I was the one with power. I was the one they needed. And I was going to make sure they understood exactly what it felt like to be powerless and dependent on someone else's kindness. At work I found myself smiling while I scanned groceries and bagged produce. My coworkers noticed and commented on how good I seemed, how much lighter my mood was. I didn't tell them about the foreclosure notice or the conversation that morning. Instead, I just enjoyed the feeling of having finally stood up for myself after years of being everyone's solution. During my lunch break, Rachel called to check in. How did it go this morning? Better than expected, I said. They offered me Jake's room if I saved their house, and I told them, this isn't my home, so it's not my problem. Rachel was quiet for a moment. How do you feel? Free, I said, and realized I meant it. For the first time in 3 years, I feel free. That evening I came home to find my entire family waiting for me in the living room, like some kind of intervention. Even Jake's girlfriend Tiffany was there, perched on the edge of the couch looking uncomfortable. We need to talk, my mother said as soon as I walked in. I looked around at all of them, these people who had spent years taking me for granted, and felt that same calm certainty I'd woken up with. Okay, I said, sitting down in Dad's chair, the one my mother usually claimed. Let's talk. Emma spoke first, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she used when she thought she was being reasonable. Kathy, we've been talking, and we think there might be some misunderstandings about the situation here. I settled back in Dad's chair, crossing my legs and waiting for whatever script they'd rehearsed while I was at work. The fact that they'd gathered Tiffany for this conversation told me they were pulling out all the stops, trying to create some kind of united front that would make me feel outnumbered and pressured. What kind of misunderstandings? I asked. My mother cleared her throat, her hands folded in her lap like she was about to deliver a prepared speech. We want you to know that we've always considered you a full member of this household, not just someone who pays rent. Is that why I've been sleeping in a closet for 3 years? The room situation is temporary, Jake said quickly. We've always planned to rearrange things when everyone got back on their feet. I looked at him, this nearly 30-year-old man who had been temporarily living in the guest room for 5 years, and felt a laugh building in my chest. When exactly did you plan to get back on your feet, Jake? His face flushed, but Tiffany reached over and squeezed his hand supportively. Jake's been working really hard on his music, she said, like that explained 5 years of unemployment. Working hard on his music, I repeat. Is that what we're calling sleeping until noon and playing guitar in the basement? That's not fair, Emma interjected. Jake is pursuing his passion, not everyone can just settle for a regular job. The irony was stunning. Jake was pursuing his passion, while I worked double shifts at a grocery store to help keep their lights on, and somehow I was the one settling. I was the one not reaching for my dreams, as if my dreams had ever mattered to any of them. What about my passions? I asked. What about my plan? The room went quiet, and I could see them all trying to remember if I'd ever mentioned having any plans or dreams or goals beyond serving as their family ATM and love-in problem solver. My mother recovered first. Of course you have plans, sweetheart. And once we get through this rough patch with the house, we can help you pursue whatever you want. Like what? Well, she hesitated, clearly realizing she had no idea what I actually wanted out of life. Whatever makes you happy. You know what would make me happy? I said, leaning forward. Having my own space, having a say in household decisions that affect me, being treated like an adult family member instead of a convenient source of labor and money. You do have a say, Emma protested. Really? When was the last time anyone asked my opinion about anything? When was the last time you consulted me before making a decision that affected the whole house? They all looked at each other and I could see them trying to come up with an example. The silence stretched long enough to prove my point. We're asking your opinion now, Jake said finally. No, you're not. You're trying to convince me to do what you want. There's a difference. Tiffany shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Maybe I should go, she said quietly. No, stay, I said. I think you should hear this. You're living here too, after all. That was news to my mother, whose eyebrows shot up. What do you mean living here? Jake's face went red. Tiffany stays over sometimes. Sometimes? I looked directly at Tiffany. How many nights this week have you slept here? It's not really, she stammered. All of them, I answered for her. Tiffany has been living here for 6 months, using our utilities, eating our food, taking up space, and not contributing a penny to household expenses. My mother turned to Jake with an expression I'd never seen before, something between fury and disbelief. Is this true? It's not like that, Jake said quickly. She's just going through a hard time with her roommate situation. So she moved in here without asking anyone. It's temporary, Tiffany said, her voice barely audible. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered that she'd been living here for free while I paid $300 a month to sleep in a closet, and my sympathy evaporated. How many temporary situations can one house handle? I asked. Jake's been temporarily living in the guest room for 5 years. Tiffany's been temporarily living here for 6 months. Emma's kids are temporarily using my childhood bedroom. When does temporary become permanent? When does anyone take responsibility for their choices? We're all family here, my mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. Tiffany isn't family. Emma's kids have a father who could take them sometimes. Jake is a grown man who could get his own apartment. But somehow I'm the only one who's expected to sacrifice my comfort and financial security to keep everyone else comfortable. Emma leaned forward, her expression softening into what I recognized as her manipulation face, the one she used when she wanted something but was pretending to be concerned about someone else. Kathy, I can see that you're feeling taken advantage of, and I want you to know that's not our intention. We love you and we want you to be happy here. If you wanted me to be happy here, you would have given me a real bedroom 3 years ago. The kids need space, she said automatically. The kids have space. They have my childhood bedroom, which is bigger than any room I've lived in since I moved back home. They're children. They need room to play and grow, and I'm an adult who needs room to exist. Jake cleared his throat. Look, we've already talked about this. I said I'd move to the basement so you can have the guest room. After 3 years of living here rent-free, you're willing to move to the basement to convince me to save the house you've been living in for free. I haven't been living here completely free, he protested. I help out around the house. Like what? I take out the trash sometimes. And I helped Mom move that dresser last month. I stared at him. You take out the trash sometimes. And you think that's equivalent to paying rent and utilities. I'm between jobs, he said defensively. You've been between jobs for 5 years. The economy is tough. The economy is tough for everyone, Jake. I managed to find a job within 2 weeks of moving back home. Not everyone can work retail, Tiffany said, clearly trying to defend her boyfriend. Why not? I asked. What's wrong with retail work? Is it beneath you? I didn't mean it like that. She backtracked quickly. Then how did you mean it? She didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. They all thought my job was beneath them, something temporary and unimportant. Even though it was the only steady income keeping the household afloat, my mother sensed the conversation was getting away from them, and tried to steer it back to their agenda. The point is, we're all in this together. And we need to work together to solve this problem. We're not all in this together, I said. I'm the only one who's been contributing financially while everyone else lives here for free, or cheap. I'm the only one who doesn't have a real bedroom. I'm the only one who gets asked to solve problems instead of being asked what I need. What do you need? Emma asked, like she was calling my bluff. I need you to stop treating me like your personal bank account. I need you to stop taking my things without asking. I need you to stop assuming I'll fix whatever crisis you've created, and I need you to understand that I don't owe you anything just because we're related. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Heavier, more fine. So you're really not going to help us save the house, my mother said finally. That's right. Even though you'll be homeless too if we lose it. I'm already homeless, I said. I've been homeless for 3 years. The only difference is that now you might be homeless too. Emma's face crumpled, and she started crying the same way she'd cried as a child when she didn't get what she wanted. Kathy, please. Think about the kids. They love this house. It's the only home they've ever known. Where was that concern when you kicked me out of my childhood bedroom so they could have more space? We didn't kick you out, she protested through her tears. We just needed to make arrangements that worked for everyone. Arrangements that worked for everyone. Except, you agreed to the closet, Jake said. I agreed to the closet because I was told it was temporary and I had nowhere else to go. I was told things would be different once everyone got back on their feet. That was 3 years ago. My mother stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. This is ridiculous. We're family. We take care of each other. When have you taken care of me? I asked. When have any of you put my needs first? When have you sacrificed anything for my benefit? We gave you a place to live, she said, her voice rising. You gave me a closet and a monthly bill. It's better than nothing. Is it? It does. Nothing might actually be better than this. That stopped her short. She turned to stare at me, and I could see the fear creeping into her eyes as she realized I wasn't bluffing. You don't mean that, she said quietly. Don't I? What exactly am I getting out of this arrangement? I pay rent to live in a closet. I have no privacy, no space, no voice in household decisions. I'm expected to contribute financially, but not allowed to benefit from any family privileges. I'm asked to solve everyone else's problems, but no one cares about solving mine. We care about your problems, Emma said weakly. Name one of my problems. She opened her mouth and then closed it again, clearly unable to think of anything. You don't even know what my problems are, I continued. You don't know what I want out of life, what my goals are, what makes me happy or sad or angry. You only notice me when you need something. That's not true, Jake protested. When's my birthday? He hesitated. It was 6 weeks ago. None of you remembered. None of you called or texted or acknowledged it in any way. The guilty looks on their faces confirmed what I already knew. My 34th birthday had passed completely unnoticed by my own family. We've been dealing with a lot of stress, my mother said defensively. You've been dealing with stress for 3 years, because you haven't remembered my birthday once since I moved back home. Tiffany looked like she wanted to disappear into the couch cushion. Even she seemed to understand how terrible this made them all look. We can do better, Emma said, wiping her eyes. We want to do better, but we need to get through this crisis first. There's always a crisis, There's always some emergency that takes priority over treating me like a human being. When does it end? When do I matter? You matter now, my mother said desperately. You matter enough that we're asking for your help. You're asking for my money. That's not the same thing. Jake leaned forward, his expression more serious than I'd seen it in years. Kathy, what would it take? What would we have to do to convince you to help us? I looked around the room at these people who claimed to love me, but had spent 3 years proving otherwise. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my frustration, all the times I'd put their needs first, all the times I'd told myself that family was supposed to be difficult sometimes. You'd have to go back in time and treat me like family from the beginning, I said finally. You'd have to undo 3 years of taking me for granted. You'd have to convince me that you actually care about me as a person, and not just as a source of money and labor. We do care about you, my mother said. Then prove. Show me that you care about me enough to let me keep my money, and find another solution to your problem. What other solution? Emma asked. We've looked at everything. You're our only option. I'm your easiest option. I correct. I'm the person you think you can manipulate and guilt into fixing your mistakes because I've been doing it for 3 years. But there are other options. You could sell the house and find something you can afford. Jake could get a job and contribute to expenses. Emma could ask her ex-husband for help with the kids so she can work more hours. Tiffany could move out and stop freeloading. You could all take responsibility for your own choices instead of expecting me to bail you out. You want us to sell the house? My mother asked, her voice hollow. I want you to solve your own problems instead of making them my problems. This house has been in our family for 30 years, she said. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you stopped paying the mortgage. The cruelty of that statement hung in the air, but I didn't take it back. I was tired of being the only one who worried about consequences, the only one who thought about the future, the only one who made sacrifices. Emma stood up suddenly, her face flushed with anger. You know what? Fine. Be selfish. Let us lose our home. Let the kids lose their stability. Let Mom lose everything Dad worked for. But don't pretend you're the victim here. I'm not pretending anything, I said calmly. I am the victim here. I've been the victim for 3 years. You're not a victim, Jake said. You're just bitter because your life didn't turn out the way you wanted. That hit closer to home than I wanted to admit, but I didn't let it show on my face. You're right, my life didn't turn out the way I wanted. I didn't want to get divorced and lose my house and my career. I didn't want to move back home at 31 years old. I didn't want to sleep in a closet and work at a grocery store and watch my siblings live the lives I used to think I'd have. Then why don't you do something about it instead of taking it out on us? Emma asked. I am doing something about it. I'm stopping the cycle where I fix everyone else's problems while mine get ignored. I'm stopping the pattern where I sacrifice my future to fund your present. So you're just going to watch us lose everything, my mother said. I'm going to watch you deal with the consequences of your own choices, the same way I've had to deal with the consequences of mine. Tiffany finally spoke up, her voice small and uncertain. Maybe I should find somewhere else to stay. That would be a start, I said. Jake turned on me, his face red with anger. Don't take this out on Tiffany. She didn't do anything wrong. She's been living here for 6 months without paying rent or contributing to expenses, while I pay $300 a month to sleep in a closet. That's different, he said. How? Because you live here. She's just visiting. She sleeps here every night, Jake. She eats our food, uses our utilities, takes up space. In what world is that visiting? He didn't have an answer for that, but his jaw was set in a stubborn line that told me he wasn't going to admit I was right. My mother sat back down, her shoulders sagging with defeat. I don't understand how we got here, she said quietly. We used to be a family. We were a family when Dad was alive, I said, because he made sure everyone was treated fairly. He made sure everyone contributed. He made sure no one took advantage of anyone else. Your father would be ashamed of you right now, she said, her voice sharp with pain and anger. That one stung, but I didn't let it derail me. Dad would be ashamed of all of us. He'd be ashamed that his wife let the house go into foreclosure. He'd be ashamed that his son has been unemployed for 5 years. He'd be ashamed that his daughter kicked his other daughter out of her childhood bedroom. And yes, he'd probably be ashamed that I let it go on this long without standing up for myself. He'd want us to stick together, Emma said. He'd want us to treat each other with respect, I countered. He'd want us to take care of each other, not take advantage of each other. The conversation was going in circles now, and I could feel my energy flagging. I'd said what I needed to say, and they'd heard what they needed to hear. The rest was up to them. I stood up from Dad's chair, and everyone watched me like they thought I might change my mind at the last second. "I'm going to bed," I announced. "Kathy, wait," my mother called out. "We're not done talking about this." "Yes, we are," I said. "I've told you my position. I'm not going to help you save the house. You have 60 days to figure out another solution. And if we can't," I paused at the entrance to the hallway, looking back at them one last time, "then we'll all find out what it's like to start over." I walked to my closet and closed the door behind me, shutting out their voices and their problems and their expectations. For the first time in 3 years, I went to sleep without worrying about how I was going to fix everyone else's life tomorrow. But I could hear them talking late into the night, their voices rising and falling as they tried to figure out how to save themselves without me. And for the first time in 3 years, that wasn't my problem to solve. The next few days passed in a strange kind of limbo. My family moved around me like I was a bomb that might explode if they said the wrong thing, but they also couldn't help themselves from making little comments designed to make me feel guilty about my decision. Emma started leaving real estate listings on the kitchen counter, printouts of tiny apartments and studio condos, with rent prices that would take most of my grocery store salary. She never said anything about them directly, but she'd make sure I saw them when I was having my morning coffee. "Wow, look at this place," she'd say to no one in particular, holding up a listing for a basement apartment with no windows, only $800 a month, and it's got its own entrance. I'd ignore her and drink my coffee in peace, but I could feel her watching me, waiting for some sign that I was reconsidering my position. Jake took a different approach. He started being aggressively helpful around the house, taking out the trash without being asked, washing dishes, even vacuuming the living room. It was like he thought that if he demonstrated his value as a household member, I'd be more willing to save the house he'd been living in for free. "I cleaned the bathroom," he'd announce when I got home from work, like he wanted a medal for basic hygiene maintenance. "Thank you," I'd say, and nothing more. My mother was the most direct in her guilt tactic. She'd bring up memories of Dad constantly, talking about how proud he'd been of the house, how hard he'd worked to pay it off, how he'd always said it would stay in the family. "Your father planted that maple tree in the front yard the year you were born," she'd say, staring out the window with a wistful expression. "He always said it would outlive all of us." "Maybe it still will," I'd reply, not taking the bait. But the most telling change was how they all started treating me with a kind of forced respect that felt almost more insulting than the neglect. Suddenly Emma was asking if I wanted to watch a movie with her. Jake was offering to make me sandwiches when he made his own lunch. My mother was asking about my day at work like she actually cared about the answer. It was transparently manipulative, but it was also the closest thing to actual family behavior I'd experienced since moving back home. The irony wasn't lost on me that it took the threat of financial ruin to make them remember I was a person with feelings and needs. On Thursday evening, I came home to find Tiffany's belongings gone from Jake's room. She wasn't there for dinner, and when I asked where she was, Jake mumbled something about her staying with a friend while they figured things out. "That's probably for the best," my mother said, and I could tell she was hoping I'd see this as progress toward earning my help. "It's a start," I acknowledged, but I didn't offer anything more. That weekend Emma took her kids to their father's house and didn't bring them back until Sunday night. When I asked about the change in custody schedule, she said she thought it would be good for them to spend more time with their dad. "Are you thinking about changing the living arrangements?" I asked. "I'm thinking about what's best for everyone," she said carefully. "What would be best for everyone is if you moved in with their father and gave me my childhood bedroom back." Her face tightened. "That's not possible right now." "Why not?" Because we're not ready for that kind of change." But you're ready for me to risk my financial future to save a house I don't even have a real room in? She didn't answer, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was starting to understand that her problems weren't automatically my problems, and it was making her uncomfortable. By the following Monday, Jake had moved his belongings to the basement and was making a big show of fixing it up as his new living space. He bought a dehumidifier with money I assumed came from my mother, and he spent hours down there organizing his music equipment and trying to make the space livable. "The guest room is ready whenever you want to move in," he announced over dinner, like he was offering me a generous gift instead of something I should have had 3 years ago. "I appreciate that," I said, "but I'm comfortable where I am." The look of shock on his face was almost comical. He'd clearly expected me to jump at the chance for a real bedroom, and my lack of enthusiasm was throwing off whatever script he'd prepared. "You don't want the guest room?" my mother asked. "I want the guest room to be offered because you think I deserve it, not because you need something from me." "We do think you deserve it," Emma said quickly. Since when? None of them could answer that question honestly, so they didn't try. The truth was, I didn't trust their sudden generosity. I knew that if I took the guest room now, they'd use it as leverage later. They'd point to it as evidence that they'd treated me fairly, that they'd given me what I wanted, so now I owed them something in return. I'd rather stay in the closet on my own terms than move to a better room under false pretenses. That evening, my mother knocked on my closet door around 10 o'clock. I was reading in bed, or trying to read while balancing a book in the cramped space. "Can we talk?" she asked through the door. "We're talking now. Can I come in?" I looked around my tiny space, barely big enough for one person to sit comfortably. "There's not really room." "Then can you come out?" I sighed and bookmarked my page, then opened the door and stepped into the hallway. My mother was wearing her old bathrobe and slippers, and she looked older than I'd noticed before, more fragile. "What did you want to talk about?" She gestured toward the living room, and I followed her there, sitting on the couch while she took Dad's chair. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, "about how we've treated you since you moved back home." I waited for her to continue. "Maybe we haven't been as considerate as we should have been," she said carefully. "Maybe," she winced, "we haven't been considerate." "You're right about that. What else am I right about?" "You're right that we've taken you for granted. You're right that we've expected you to solve problems that weren't your responsibility. You're right that we haven't treated you like family." I felt a small flicker of surprise. I hadn't expected her to admit so much so directly, but, she continued, and I knew there was going to be a but. "Losing this house won't solve any of those problems. It'll just create new ones for all of us. It'll create consequences for the choices you've made." I correct. "That's not the same thing as creating problems. Where will we go if we lose the house?" "I don't know, Mom. Where will I go?" "You're young. You can start over. I'm 34 years old with bad credit and a part-time job. Starting over isn't as easy as you think." She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her trying to reconcile the image of me as someone who could easily bounce back with the reality of my actual situation. "What would it take?" she asked finally. "What would we have to do to earn your help?" "You can't earn it," I said. "It's too late for that." "It's not too late," she protested. "We can change. We can do better. You can change for yourselves, not for me. You can do better because it's the right thing to do, not because you need something from me. But if we change, if we do better, will you reconsider?" I looked at her, this woman who had raised me and loved me in her own imperfect way, and I felt a familiar tug of sympathy. But I also remembered 3 years of sleeping in a closet, 3 years of being taken for granted, 3 years of watching my needs come last. "No," I said, "I won't reconsider." Her face fell. "Even if we prove that we've learned from our mistakes." "Mom, you haven't learned from your mistakes. You're trying to avoid the consequences of your mistakes. There's a difference." "What consequences? Losing our home? Being scattered to different places? Never being a family again?" "Maybe that's what needs to happen," I said quietly. "Maybe this family needs to fall apart, so it can be rebuilt into something better." She stared at me like I'd suggested burning the house down myself. You don't mean that. I do mean it. This family doesn't work. It hasn't worked since Dad died, and maybe it didn't work before that either. Maybe we've all been pretending that dysfunction is normal because it's what we're used to. We love each other, she said desperately. Love isn't enough if it's not backed up by respect and consideration and fairness. You can love someone and still treat them terribly. We don't treat you terribly. You let me live in a closet for 3 years while my brother lives rent-free in a real bedroom. You borrow money from me regularly, but never ask what I need. You take my belongings without permission. You make household decisions without consulting me. You expect me to solve your problems but ignore mine. If that's not terrible treatment, it's close enough. She was crying now, quiet tears that she wiped away with the sleeve of her bathrobe. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. You don't have to fix it, I said. You just have to accept that it's broken and move forward from there. Without the house, without the expectation that I'll sacrifice my future to preserve your past. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of unspoken words and unresolved hurt filling the space between us. Finally, she stood up and walked toward the stairs. I love you, Kathy, she said, without turning around. I love you too, I replied. But that doesn't change anything. After she went upstairs, I sat alone in the living room where I'd grown up, looking at the family photos on the mantel and trying to remember when we'd been the people in those pictures, when we'd been happy and connected and functional. I couldn't remember, and I wondered if those photos had always been lies, moments of artificial harmony captured between longer periods of dysfunction and neglect. Maybe losing the house would be the best thing that could happen to all of us. Maybe we needed to be forced out of our comfortable patterns of taking each other for granted. Maybe we needed to learn how to be family to each other before we could share a home again. 3 weeks after my conversation with my mother, the desperation in the house had reached a fever pitch. The foreclosure notice had been joined by several other ominous envelopes from the bank, and I could feel the panic radiating from my family members like heat from a fever. They moved through the house with a frantic energy, making phone calls and having hushed conversations that stopped whenever I entered a room. I maintained my routine, going to work each day and coming home to sleep in my closet. But now there was an electric tension in the air that made every interaction feel charged with unspoken accusations and barely contained desperation. My family had stopped trying to convince me through kindness and had moved into a phase that felt more like warfare. Emma had started bringing documents home from work, spreading them across the kitchen table and making calls to banks and loan officers with increasingly frantic urgency. She'd found out that with her current income and credit score, she couldn't qualify for a loan large enough to save the house, and the reality of that limitation was hitting her like cold water. What about a personal loan? I heard her asking someone over the phone one evening. No, I understand the interest rate would be higher, but we're in a time-sensitive situation here. She caught me listening and covered the phone with her hand. Do you know what your credit score is? She asked. Me. Yes, I said, not offering the number. Is it good enough to qualify for a $12,000 personal loan? Probably. Her eyes lit up with hope. Would you be willing to apply for one? We could pay you back monthly, with interest. No. The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. Why? Because you've never paid me back for anything else you've borrowed. Because a personal loan would have a high interest rate that you can't afford. Because you'd default on the payments and ruin my credit score. We wouldn't default, she protested. How would you make the payment? Where's the extra money going to come from? She didn't have an answer for that, and we both knew it. Her income was already stretched thin between her own expenses and helping with the kids. There was no magical source of additional income that would suddenly appear to cover loan payment. Jake had taken a different approach to the crisis. He'd finally gotten a job, though calling it a job was generous. He'd started doing odd jobs for neighbors, yard work and minor repairs. Anything that paid cash under the table. The irony of him finally finding work motivation only when his free housing was threatened wasn't lost on me. I made $60 today, he announced over dinner, setting the crumpled bills on the table like an offering. helping Mrs. Patterson clean out her garage. My mother looked at the money with a mixture of pride and despair. $60 was more than Jake had contributed to the household in years, but it was also a drop in the ocean compared to what they needed. "That's wonderful, honey," she said. "Every little bit helps. If I can keep this up, maybe I can bring in a few $100s a month," he said, and I could see him doing the math in his head, trying to figure out how many garages he'd need to clean to save the house. "That's still not enough to cover the mortgage payments," I pointed out gently. His face fell. "It's a start, though. It's a start that should have happened 5 years ago." The comment stung, and I could see it in his expression, but I didn't apologize. It was true, and truth was something this family had been avoiding for too long. My mother had been making calls to extended family members, reaching out to cousins and aunts and uncles we hadn't spoken to in years, testing whether anyone might be willing to loan us money. I could hear her in her bedroom some evenings, her voice alternating between casual and pleading as she tried to reconnect with relatives she'd lost touch with. "Hi, Carol. It's Sandra. Yes, I know it's been too long since we talked. How are the grandkids?" Long pause. "That's wonderful. Listen, I was calling because we're going through a bit of a rough patch here, and I was wondering if you might be able to help us out temporarily." The conversations always followed the same pattern: reconnection, small talk, then the ask, then the polite refusal, then the awkward goodbye. She'd emerge from her room each time looking more defeated, crossing another name off her list of potential saviors. "What about your cousin Michael?" Emma suggested after another failed call. "Didn't he do well in real estate?" "Michael hasn't spoken to me since your father's funeral," my mother replied. "He thought I was rude to his wife." "Were you?" "That's not the point, but it was the point. My family had spent years burning bridges and taking relationships for granted, and now they were discovering that social capital, like financial capital, couldn't be withdrawn indefinitely without consequence. The most painful part was watching them slowly realize that I was their only realistic option. They'd exhausted the banks, the extended family, the friends, the neighbors. They'd looked into selling possessions, taking in boarders, cutting expenses to the bone. Every avenue led back to the same conclusion. They needed $12,000 from someone who trusted them enough to loan it, and I was the only person in their lives who both had access to that money and hadn't already been alienated by their behavior. It was during this period that they started making increasingly desperate promises about how different things would be if I helped them. Emma offered to move out entirely, to find her own place and take the kids with her so I could have my childhood bedroom back. Jake promised to pay me rent for the basement, to turn his occasional handyman work into a real business that would contribute meaningfully to household expenses. My mother offered to put my name on the deed to the house, to make me a legal co-owner so I'd have a stake in its future. She offered to change her will to leave me a larger share of whatever assets remained. She offered to formalize our living arrangement with a lease that would give me tenant rights and protection from future change. Each offer was more desperate than the last, and each one confirmed what I already knew. They were willing to promise me anything to get what they needed, but none of those promises would survive the immediate crisis. Once the house was saved, once the pressure was off, they'd find reasons why the promises couldn't be kept, obstacles that made the new arrangements impossible or unfair. I'd seen this pattern too many times before. The desperate promises during crisis, followed by convenient amnesia once the crisis passed. "I appreciate the offers," I told them each time, "but my decision hasn't changed." The frustration in the house was becoming toxic. Emma had started making snide comments about my selfishness whenever she thought I couldn't hear. Jake had begun muttering about how some people thought they were better than their own family. My mother oscillated between trying to guilt me with tears and trying to shame me with anger. "I don't understand you anymore," she said to me one morning over coffee. "The Kathy I raised would never let her family lose their home over money." "The Kathy you raised never learned to stand up for herself," I replied. "Maybe it's time she'd." "Standing up for yourself doesn't mean tearing down everyone around you." "I'm not tearing anyone down. I'm just refusing to be torn down anymore." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Emma went to answer it, and came back with an envelope that made all the color drain from her face. "What is it?" my mother asked. It's from the sheriff's office, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. My mother tore open the envelope and read the contents, her hands shaking. They're scheduling the foreclosure auction, she said. 6 weeks from today. The silence that followed was heavy with finality. The abstract threat of losing the house had suddenly become concrete, scheduled, inevitable. In 6 weeks, unless something changed dramatically, strangers would be walking through our home, evaluating its worth, preparing to bid on our family's history. Emma sank into a chair, the legal notice still clutched in her hand. 6 weeks, she repeated. That's not enough time. It's not enough time to do what? I asked. To find another solution. To figure something else out. You've had 3 months to figure something else out. What makes you think 6 weeks will be different? Jake came into the kitchen, drawn by the somber atmosphere. What's wrong now? Emma handed him the notice, and he read it twice before the implications sank in. This is really happening, he said, more to himself than to us. It's really happening, my mother confirmed. They all looked at me then, their last hope, their final option, the sister and daughter who could save them if only she would stop being so stubborn and selfish and cruel. Kathy, Emma said, her voice breaking, please, I'm begging you, don't let this happen to us. I'm not letting anything happen to you, I said calmly. You're experiencing the consequences of choices you made. I didn't make those choices for you. We made mistakes, Jake said. People make mistakes. That doesn't mean they deserve to lose everything. It doesn't mean other people should lose everything to fix their mistakes, either. You wouldn't be losing everything, Emma protested. You'd be helping your family. I'd be risking my financial future to fix a problem I didn't create for people who have never prioritized my well-being. We're prioritizing your well-being now, my mother said desperately. No, you're prioritizing your crisis now. There's a difference. The truth of that statement settled over the room like dust. They couldn't argue with it because we all knew it was accurate. Their sudden interest in my comfort and happiness was transparently motivated by their need for my money. What if we could guarantee that things would be different? Emma asked. What if we could prove that we've learned from this? How? We could write up an agreement, something legal, something that would protect your interests and make sure you're treated fairly. I almost laughed. You want to write a contract that requires you to treat me like family? If that's what if you need a contract to treat me with basic respect, then we don't have a family relationship worth saving. That comment hit harder than I'd intended, and I could see it land like a physical blow on all three of them. But it was true, and I was tired of protecting them from uncomfortable truths. My mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I can't do this anymore, she said. I can't sit here and listen to you lecture us about respect, while you watch us lose everything. Dad worked for a lot of things, I said. He worked for honesty, he worked for fairness, he worked for responsibility. The house was just where he kept those values. Don't you dare tell me what your father would have wanted, she snapped. He would have wanted his family to stick together. He would have wanted his family to take care of each other, not just take from each other. She stormed out of the kitchen, and I could hear her footsteps heavy on the stairs, then the slam of her bedroom door. Emma and Jake sat in uncomfortable silence, looking anywhere but at me. She's really scared, Emma said finally. I know she is. We all are. I know, but you don't care. I considered that question seriously before answering. I care that you're scared. I don't care enough to sacrifice my own security to alleviate your fear. That sounds like the same thing, Jake said. It's not. Caring about someone's pain doesn't mean you're obligated to fix it, especially when fixing it would cause you pain. So you're choosing yourself over your family. I'm choosing to stop choosing everyone else over myself. The distinction was important to me, even if it wasn't to them. I wasn't acting out of malice or revenge. I was acting out of self-preservation and self-respect. I was finally treating myself like someone whose needs matter. Emma gathered up the foreclosure papers and legal notices, stacking them into a neat pile. I need to make some phone calls, she said. Maybe there's still something we haven't tried. After she left, Jake and I sat alone at the kitchen table. He was fidgeting with his coffee mug, turning it in circles and avoiding eye contact. Can I ask you something? He said finally. Sure. Do you hate us? The question caught me off guard. I'd been expecting anger or more guilt tactics, not genuine curiosity about my feelings. "No," I said. "I don't hate you. It feels like you hate us. I'm disappointed in you. I'm hurt by how you've treated me. I'm frustrated that it took a crisis to make you notice I'm a person with needs and feelings, but I don't hate you." "Then why won't you help us?" "Because helping you wouldn't actually help you. It would just enable you to keep making the same mistakes. It would teach you that there are no real consequences for your choices, because someone will always bail you out. What if we promise to do better?" "Jake, you've been making promises about doing better for 5 years. You promised to get a job after you dropped out of school. You promised to contribute to household expenses when you moved back home. You promised to move out when you got back on your feet. Your promises don't mean anything because you don't follow through on them. This is different." "How?" "Because this time the consequences are real. The consequences have always been real. They just haven't affected you personally until now." He was quiet for a long time, absorbing that. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. "I never thought about it that way. I know you didn't. That's part of the problem. What would it take for you to trust us again?" "Time, consistency, evidence that you can change your behavior without being forced to. Evidence that you care about my well-being, even when you don't need anything from me." "How long?" "I don't know. Maybe years, maybe never." "That's not fair." "It's completely fair. Trust is earned, Jake. It's not something you're entitled to just because we're related." Over the following days, the house felt like a bomb waiting to explode. My family members moved around each other with brittle politeness, their conversations stilted and careful. The foreclosure notice had been posted on the refrigerator like a countdown clock, marking the days until their world would change forever. Emma had started packing boxes, sorting through belongings and deciding what was worth keeping and what could be sold or donated. The sight of cardboard boxes stacked in the hallway was surreal, like watching someone else's life being dismantled piece by piece. "Where will you go?" I asked her one evening as she wrapped dishes in newspaper. "I'm looking at apartments," she said without looking up. "Something small that I can afford on my own." "What about the kids?" "They'll adjust. Kids are resilient." I wanted to point out that the kids' resilience shouldn't have to be tested because of adult mistakes, but I kept that thought to myself. Emma was dealing with enough guilt and stress without my commentary. Jake had increased his odd job work, staying out of the house from dawn until dusk and coming home exhausted and covered in dirt. He was making a few $100s a week now, more money than he'd earned in years, but it was too little too late to make any difference in the larger crisis. "I could keep this up," he told me one night as he counted out his daily earnings on the kitchen counter. "I could build this into a real business. I just need more time." "You've had 5 years, Jake." "I know, but I wasn't motivated then. I am now." "You're motivated by desperation. That's not the same as being motivated by responsibility or ambition." "Does it matter what motivates me as long as I'm working?" "It matters for whether you'll keep working once the desperation is gone." He didn't argue with that assessment, probably because he knew I was right. My mother had stopped speaking to me almost entirely. She'd acknowledged my presence with curt nods and one-word responses, but the warmth that had characterized our relationship throughout my life had evaporated. She blamed me for the impending loss of the house, and she wasn't trying to hide her resentment. I found her in Dad's old office one evening, sitting at his desk and looking through photo albums. The pictures showed our family during happier times, holidays and vacations, graduations and birthdays, moments when we'd genuinely enjoyed each other's company. "I was trying to figure out when it all went wrong," she said without looking up. "When what went wrong?" "Us, this family, when we stopped being the people in these pictures." I sat down in the chair across from the desk, the one I'd occupied as a child when Dad helped me with homework. "Maybe we were never really the people in those pictures," I said gently. "Maybe those were just moments of pretending everything was okay. We were happy then, were we? Or were we just better at hiding the problem?" She closed the photo album and looked at me directly for the first time in days. "Do you really think we're beyond saving? As a family? No, but I think we need to fall apart before we can be put back together properly. Losing the house will destroy us. Losing the house will force you to face reality. That's not the same thing as being destroyed." "Where's the compassion in that?" The compassion is in refusing to enable your self-destruction. The compassion is in believing that you're capable of learning and growing, and taking responsibility for your choices. It doesn't feel like compassion, I know it does, but sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to rescue them from the consequences of their actions. She opened the photo album again, staring at a picture of our family from Christmas 5 years ago, the last one before Dad died. He would have found a way to keep us together, she said quietly. He would have found a way to keep us together without sacrificing anyone's dignity or well-being. That's the difference. What's going to happen to us? I don't know, Mom, but I know that whatever happens, you'll all survive it. You'll figure out how to rebuild your lives. You'll learn to be responsible for yourselves, and maybe eventually, you'll understand why I made this choice. Will you ever forgive us? There's nothing to forgive. You're not bad people. You're just people who lost their way and forgot how to be a family. That's not unforgivable. But you won't help us. I won't enable you. There's a difference. 2 weeks before the foreclosure auction, Emma found a small apartment across town that she could afford with her current income. It was a 2-bedroom place in an older building. Nothing fancy but clean and safe. She put down a deposit and started making arrangements to move her belongings. The kids will have to share a room, she told me as she showed me pictures on her phone. But it's temporary. Once I get promoted at work, we can look for something bigger. It looks nice, I said, and I meant it. The apartment was small but bright, with big windows and hardwood floors. It looked like a place where Emma could start over, build a life that was actually within her means. I should have done this years ago, she admitted. I should have been independent instead of relying on living here for free. Why didn't you? Because it was easier not to. Because I could save money and let Mom take care of the kids and pretend I was just temporarily getting back on my feet after the divorce. And now I don't have a choice, but maybe that's not a bad thing. Jake had found a room to rent in a house with 3 other guys, all of them in their 20s and 30s, all trying to figure out their lives. It wasn't ideal, but it was affordable. And it would force him to maintain steady employment to make the rent payment. It'll be weird, having roommates again, he said. I haven't done that since college. It might be good for you, I said, living with other people who are working and paying their own way. Yeah. Maybe I'll learn something. My mother had been the most resistant to making alternative arrangements, clinging to the hope that something would change at the last minute. But with 10 days left before the auction, she finally admitted that she needed to start looking for a place to live. There's a senior community about 20 minutes from here, she told me over dinner. They have 1-bedroom apartments that include utilities. It's not cheap, but it's manageable on Social Security and Dad's pension. That sounds like it could be good for you. Being around other people your age, having activities and social opportunities. I never thought I'd live in a place like that. Life doesn't always go the way we think it will. No, it doesn't. The sadness in her voice was profound, but underneath it, I could hear something else. Acceptance. She was finally acknowledging that the life she'd been trying to preserve was over, and it was time to figure out what came next. Will you visit me? She asked. Once I'm settled, of course I will. Even though I've been angry with you. Even though you've been angry with me. I love you, Kathy. I hope you know that. I love you too, Mom. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, eating dinner in the house that would soon belong to someone else. For the first time in weeks, the atmosphere felt peaceful instead of frantic. The crisis was still approaching, but we'd all stopped fighting it, and started preparing for it instead. What about you? My mother asked. Where will you go? I'd been thinking about that question for weeks, and I'd finally come to a decision that felt right. I'm going to get my own place, I said. A studio apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, but it'll be mine. Can you afford that on your salary? I've been saving money for 3 years while living here. I have enough for a deposit, and several months of rent. And I'm going to look for a better job, something full-time with benefits. You're really leaving us. I'm really starting my own life. 3 days before the foreclosure auction, I gave my 2 weeks' notice at the grocery store and started looking for full-time work. I had interviews lined up at 2 different companies, both offering positions that would use my college degree and my work experience from before the divorce. I also found a studio apartment in a converted warehouse downtown, small but bright, with exposed brick walls and big windows. The rent was more than I'd ever paid for housing, but it was within my budget if I managed my money carefully. Most importantly, it was mine. No one could kick me out or make me feel unwelcome or treat me like a tenant in my own home. The night before the auction, we all sat together in the living room one last time. The house was mostly packed up now, boxes stacked everywhere, furniture tagged for different destinations. Emma was taking some pieces to her new apartment, Jake was taking others to his room rental, and my mother was donating most of the larger items to charity. "It's strange," Emma said, looking around at the bare walls where family photos used to hang. "I thought this would feel more tragic." "How does it feel?" I asked. "Like relief, almost. Like we're finally dealing with reality, instead of pretending everything was fine." "I feel that too," Jake admitted. "It's scary, but it's also kind of exciting. Like I get to start over and do things right this time." My mother was quieter, but she nodded agreement. "I keep thinking your father would be proud of us for facing this with dignity instead of falling apart." "He would be proud," I agreed. "Are you proud of yourself?" Emma asked me. "For standing up to us?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm proud of myself for finally valuing my own well-being. I'm proud of myself for refusing to enable behavior that was hurting all of us. I'm proud of myself for believing that we're all capable of learning and growing, even though it meant watching us lose everything." "You're not losing everything. You're losing a house that you couldn't afford, and a lifestyle that wasn't sustainable. But you're keeping your health, your relationships, your ability to start over. That's not nothing." The auction was scheduled for 10 in the morning. I didn't go, but I heard about it later from my mother. The house sold for enough to cover the outstanding mortgage debt and the bank's fees, but there was nothing left over for the family. 30 years of payments and memories, gone in one morning. But the strangest thing was that none of them seemed devastated by the loss. They seemed almost relieved to have it behind them, to be able to stop fighting a battle they couldn't win. That evening, I helped Emma load the last of her boxes into her car. Her kids were staying with their father for a few days, while she got settled in the new apartment, and she seemed more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. "Thank you," she said as we carried the final box to her car. "For what?" "For not rescuing us, for making us figure this out ourselves." "You would have figured it out eventually." "Maybe, but probably not until we'd dragged you down with us." I hugged her goodbye, and for the first time in years it felt like hugging my sister instead of someone who needed something from me. Jake left the next morning, loading his belongings into a borrowed truck with the help of his new roommates. He seemed nervous but excited about the change, like he was finally ready to grow up and take responsibility for his own life. "I'm going to do better this time," he told me as he prepared to drive away. "I'm going to prove that you were right to believe in me. I'll be here when you're ready to show me." My mother was the last to leave, moving into her senior community apartment with a mixture of sadness and anticipation. I helped her unpack and arrange her furniture, making the new space feel as much like home as possible. "It's not so bad," she said as we hung pictures on the wall. "The neighbors seem nice, and there's a book club I might join." "It looks perfect for you," I said, and I meant it. The apartment was bright and cheerful, and the community offered activities and social opportunities that my mother had been missing since Dad died. "Will you really visit?" she asked as I prepared to leave. "I really will, as often as you want me to." "What if I want you to visit every week?" "Then I'll visit every week." She hugged me tightly, and I could feel some of the tension and resentment that had built up between us finally starting to dissolve. "I understand now," she whispered, "why you did what you did. It was the right thing, even though it was hard." "I hope so. I hope we all come out of this better than we went in." 2 weeks later, I moved into my studio apartment downtown. It was small and expensive and completely mine. I had a real bed in a real bedroom, a kitchen where I could cook my own meals, a living area where I could read and watch television, and exist without anyone asking me to solve their problems or fix their mistakes. For the first time in 3 years, I went to sleep in my own space and I woke up feeling like myself again. Living in my own space felt surreal for the first few weeks. I'd wake up in the morning and for a split second forget where I was, expecting to see coats hanging above my head or hear the chaos of Emma's children running through the hallways. Instead, I'd see sunlight streaming through my own windows, illuminating my own furniture in my own quiet space. The silence was the most striking difference. For 3 years, I'd lived surrounded by other people's noise, other people's problems, other people's drama. Now I had silence when I wanted it, music when I chose it, and conversations only when I initiated them. The luxury of controlling my own environment felt almost decadent after so long without it. My new job at Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized accounting firm, was everything my grocery store position hadn't. I used my degree, worked with professional colleagues, and earned enough to not only cover my rent, but also start rebuilding my savings. The work was challenging in a way that felt productive rather than exhausting, and for the first time in years I felt like I was moving forward instead of just surviving. My coworkers were friendly but respectful of boundaries, nothing like the forced intimacy of living with family who took my presence for granted. During lunch breaks, I could read a book or take a walk or simply sit quietly without anyone asking me to solve their problems or contribute to their crises. But perhaps the most significant change was in how I felt about myself. Living independently again reminded me that I was capable, competent, and worthy of respect. I'd forgotten those things during my years in the closet, when my family's treatment had slowly eroded my sense of self-worth. Now, coming home each evening to a space that was entirely mine, I remembered who I was before divorce and financial ruin had made me vulnerable to other people's disregard. 3 months into my new life, Emma called to tell me about her first promotion at work. She'd been made a team leader, with a modest raise and the possibility of further advancement if she continued to perform well. I never would have pushed for this if I was still living at Mom's, she admitted during our conversation. I would have stayed comfortable in my old position and complained about not getting ahead. What changed? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Having to pay my own rent changed everything. Having to be responsible for my own life made me realize I was capable of more than I thought. Her apartment was working out well, she told me. The kids had adjusted to sharing a room, and the smaller space had forced them all to be more organized and intentional about their belongings. She'd also established a better custody arrangement with her ex-husband, one where he took the children every other weekend and one evening during the week. It's better for everyone, she said. The kids get more time with their father, I get some time to myself, and he's actually stepping up as a parent instead of leaving everything to me. How do you feel about the changes? Scared sometimes, she admitted, but also proud. I'm supporting myself and my children without depending on anyone else. That feels good in a way I didn't expect. We met for coffee a few days later, something we'd never done when we lived in the same house. She looked different somehow, more confident and self-possessed. The perpetual stress lines around her eyes had softened, and she carried herself like someone who knew she could handle whatever challenges came her way. I owe you an apology, she said after we'd ordered our drinks. For what? For the way we treated you when you lived with us, for taking advantage of your kindness, for expecting you to solve our problems while ignoring yours. You don't need to apologize for that. Yes, I do. We were selfish and thoughtless, and we made your life miserable because it was easier than taking responsibility for our own lives. I stirred my coffee and considered how to respond. The apology felt genuine, not like something she was saying because she wanted something from me. I appreciate you saying that, I said finally, but I'm not angry about it anymore. You're not? I understand why it happened, and I understand why it had to end the way it did. Do you think we would have changed if you'd stayed and kept enabling us? No, I said without hesitation. I think we all would have gotten more comfortable with the dysfunction until it felt normal. The foreclosure was awful at the time, Emma said, but I think it saved us, all of us. She was right, though I wouldn't have been able to see it that way during the crisis. The forced separation had given each of us the opportunity to discover who we were as individuals. Independent of the family roles we'd fallen into after Dad's death, Jake had surprised everyone, including himself, by thriving in his new living situation. His roommates were all employed, motivated people who expected him to contribute equally to household responsibilities and expenses. The environment had pushed him to maintain steady work and develop better habits than he'd had in years. "I've been working landscaping jobs 6 days a week," he told me when he called to update me on his progress. "It's hard work, but I like being outside, and the pay is decent." "Are you enjoying it?" "More than I expect. I'm thinking about getting certified in landscape design, maybe starting my own business eventually." "That sounds like a good plan. I know I have a lot to prove," he said. "I wasted a lot of years feeling sorry for myself and expecting other people to take care of me. I'm not proud of that." "People change," I said. "What matters is what you do going forward." "I want to pay you back," he said suddenly, "for all the money you lent me over the years. I know I said I would before, but I never followed through. This time I want to actually do it." "Jake, you don't have to do that." "Yes, I do. I need to do it for me, as much as for you. I need to prove to myself that I can keep my word about something important." He'd been keeping track of every loan, every favor, every time I'd covered expenses that should have been his responsibility. The total was more than I'd realized, probably because I'd stopped keeping track after the first year of never being repaid. "It'll take me a while to pay it all back," he said, "but I want to send you something every month until it's done." "Okay," I agreed, though the money mattered less to me than the gesture itself. True to his word, he started sending me modest payments each month, along with brief notes updating me on his progress. The amounts were small, but they arrived regularly, and each payment felt like evidence that he was becoming the kind of person who honored his commitments. My mother had adapted to her new living situation better than any of us had expected. The senior community offered activities and social opportunities that had been missing from her life since Dad's death, and she'd made several close friends among her neighbors. "I joined the gardening club," she told me during one of my weekly visits. "We're planning the flower beds for next spring, and I volunteered to coordinate the herb garden." She seemed more engaged and energetic than she'd been in years, no longer isolated in a house that held too many memories and required too much maintenance for one person to manage alone. "Do you miss the old house?" I asked. "Sometimes," she said, "but not as much as I thought I would. That house was full of memories, but some of them weren't good ones. This place feels lighter somehow." "Lighter how?" "I don't have to worry about repairs I can't afford or rooms I never use. I don't have to feel guilty about my children sacrificing their independence to take care of me. I can just focus on enjoying my life." She'd also started volunteer work at a local literacy center, helping adults learn to read. The work gave her a sense of purpose that had been missing since she'd stopped working to care for Dad during his final illness. "It feels good to be useful again," she said, "to be helping people instead of needing help." During my visits, we'd walk around the community grounds, or sit in her small but comfortable apartment, talking about books she was reading or activities she was planning. The conversations were different from our interactions during the years I'd lived with her. There was less tension, less underlying resentment, more genuine interest in each other's lives. "I'm proud of you," she said during one visit, apropos of nothing we'd been discussing. "For what?" "For having the courage to let us fail. For believing we were strong enough to survive the consequences of our mistakes." "I'm proud of you too," I said, "for rebuilding your life instead of just mourning the old one." "It wasn't easy at first," she admitted. "I was angry with you for a long time. I know you were, but I understand now that you were right. We needed to hit bottom before we could start climbing back up." The conversation reminded me of something Dad used to say about teaching children to ride bicycles. He believed in removing the training wheels as soon as possible, even if it meant some falls and scraped knees, because the temporary pain was worth the long-term independence. "Your father would be proud of all of us," my mother said, as if reading my thought. "He always said the measure of a family wasn't whether they faced difficulties, but how they handled them." 6 months after the foreclosure, we gathered for Emma's birthday at her apartment. It was the first family gathering we'd had since losing the house, and the atmosphere was completely different from our old holiday celebration. Instead of the underlying tension and unspoken resentments that had characterized our interactions before, There was a sense of genuine affection and mutual respect. Emma had cooked dinner herself, something she'd rarely done when she lived at Mom's, and relied on others to handle household responsibilities. The meal was simple but delicious, and her children helped serve and clean up without being asked. "This is nice," Jake said, looking around the small but cheerful apartment. "It feels like a real home." "It is a real home," Emma replied. "The first one I've really made for myself and the kid." Jake had brought flowers and a card he'd made himself, something artistic and thoughtful that showed he'd put real effort into the gesture. My mother had brought a photo album she'd assembled with pictures from Emma's childhood, a gift that required time and consideration rather than just money. I'd brought earrings I'd made myself, a hobby I'd rediscovered now that I had my own space and time to pursue creative interests. Emma seemed genuinely touched by the personal nature of all our gifts, so different from the expensive but impersonal presents we'd exchanged during more prosperous times. "I love that you made these," she said, examining the earrings. "I didn't even know you did jewelry making." "I didn't either until recently. I'm taking a class downtown on Thursday evenings." "What else are you doing with your free time?" my mother asked. I told them about the art class, my book club, the hiking group I'd joined, the cooking experiments I'd been trying in my small but functional kitchen. Having my own life had given me the mental and emotional space to rediscover interests I'd forgotten I had. "You seem happier," Jake observed. "More like yourself." "I feel more like myself," I agreed. Living independently again reminded me who I am when I'm not constantly managing other people's crises. "We were pretty crisis-prone, weren't we?" Emma said ruefully. "We were," my mother agreed. "I think we got into a pattern after your father died where we just reacted to problems, instead of preventing them." "What's different now?" I asked. "Now we have to prevent our own problems," Jake said, "because there's no one else to fix them for us." "Is that better or worse?" "Better," Emma said, immediately. "Definitely better. It's scarier sometimes, but it's also more honest." The evening passed peacefully, with conversation that felt natural rather than forced. We talked about work and hobbies and future plans, topics that would have been impossible when our interactions were dominated by immediate crises and urgent needs. When it was time to leave, we hugged goodbye like people who genuinely cared about each other rather than people who were obligated to tolerate each other. "Same time next month," Emma suggested. "We could make this a regular thing." "I'd like that," my mother said. "Me too," Jake and I agreed simultaneously. Walking back to my car, I reflected on how different the evening had been from our old family gatherings. There had been no drama, no hidden agendas, no one asking anyone else to solve their problems or provide financial assistance. We'd simply enjoyed each other's company, which felt revolutionary after years of complicated family dynamics. As fall turned to winter, our monthly family dinners became a cherished tradition. We rotated hosting duties, with each person taking responsibility for planning and preparing the meal. The arrangements forced all of us to develop domestic skills we'd neglected when we lived together and divided responsibilities unevenly. Jake, who had never cooked more than instant noodles when he lived at home, surprised us with an elaborate pasta dinner that showed he'd been practicing and learning. My mother, who had always relied on others to provide transportation, had learned to use public transit and ride-sharing services to maintain her independence. Emma had become more organized and efficient, qualities that had emerged when she was forced to manage her household without backup support. The children were more self-sufficient too, helping with chores and taking responsibility for their own belongings, in ways they never had when they lived in a larger house with more adults to pick up after them. During one of our dinners, Emma's ex-husband dropped by to pick up the kid. I was surprised to see how cordial and cooperative their interaction was, so different from the hostile exchanges I remembered from when she lived at Mom's. "Things are better between you two," I observed after he left. "Much better," Emma agreed. "I think moving out of Mom's house helped with that too." "How so?" "When I was living there, I felt like a victim all the time, like everything that went wrong was someone else's fault, including the divorce. Moving out and supporting myself made me realize I had more control over my life than I thought, and that changed how you interact with him. It changed how I interact with everyone. When you're not depending on other people to solve your problems, you don't have to be angry at them for not solving them fast enough or well enough." The insight was profound, and it applied to all of our relationships. Living independently had given each of us the opportunity to take responsibility for our own happiness instead of expecting others to provide. I thought about my own dating life, which had been non-existent during my years in the closet, but was slowly re-emerging now that I had my own space and sense of self. I'd been on a few dates with a man named David, who worked in the building next to me, and while it was too early to know if it would develop into anything serious, the experience of dating as an independent adult was completely different from my marriage, which had begun when I was young and financially dependent. I met someone, I told them during one of our dinners. Really? Emma leaned forward with interest. Tell us about him. I described David, his work as an environmental consultant, his love of hiking and photography, his easy laugh and thoughtful conversation. As I talked, I realized that I was describing someone who complemented my life, rather than someone I needed to complete it. He sounds nice, my mother said. Are you happy? I'm happy with my life, I said. He makes it better, but he doesn't make it complete. I was already complete. That's a good way to think about relationships, Jake said. I always thought I needed someone else to make me whole, but maybe that's why my relationships never worked out. Maybe we all had to learn to be whole by ourselves before we could be good partners to other people, Emma suggested. The conversation reminded me of something Dad used to say about love, that it should be like two people choosing to walk in the same direction rather than two people leaning on each other to keep from falling over. As winter progressed into spring, the changes in all of our lives became more pronounced and permanent. Jake had been promoted to crew leader at the landscaping company, and was making plans to enroll in community college courses for landscape design. Emma had been promoted again and was looking at houses she might be able to buy in a few years, once her credit recovered and she'd saved enough for a down payment. My mother had joined the board of directors for her literacy volunteer organization, and was helping to plan a fundraising gala for the fall. She'd also started dating a widower from her book club, something that surprised all of us but seemed to make her genuinely happy. I never thought I'd want companionship again, she told me during one of our visits. I thought Dad was the only person I could ever love that way. How do you feel about it now? I feel like Dad would want me to be happy, and Harold makes me happy in a way that doesn't diminish what I had with your father. Harold was a retired teacher, soft-spoken and kind, with grown children of his own, who lived across the country. He treated my mother with obvious affection and respect, and their relationship seemed to be built on shared interests and genuine compatibility rather than neediness or desperation. I'm glad you found him, I said, and I meant it. I'm glad I was in a position to find him, she replied. If I was still in that big house, feeling sorry for myself and depending on my children to keep me company, I never would have been open to meeting someone new. The observation was astute and illustrated something I'd been thinking about regarding all of our transformation. The forced independence had created opportunities for growth and happiness that wouldn't have existed if we'd continued our old patterns. On the first anniversary of the foreclosure, we decided to drive by the old house. None of us had seen it since the day we'd packed up and moved out, and we were curious about what the new owners had done with it. The house looked better than it had in years. The new family had painted the exterior, landscaped the front yard, and added a porch swing that made the whole property look more welcoming. Children's bicycles were scattered on the lawn, and there were flower boxes in the window. It looks happy, Emma said as we sat in the car looking at our former home. It does, my mother agreed, like a house where people who love each other live. Do you miss it? I asked. I miss the idea of it, Jake said, but not the reality of what our lives were like when we lived there. I don't miss it at all, Emma said. This is going to sound strange, but I think we were bad for that house. We weren't taking care of it properly because none of us were taking care of ourselves properly. The house deserves a family that can appreciate it, my mother said. A family that chooses to be together instead of just ending up together by default. As we drove away, I thought about how different our perspectives were from a year ago. Then, losing the house had felt like losing everything. Now, it felt like losing the weight that had been holding us all back from becoming the people we were meant to be. That evening, we had dinner at my apartment for the first time. I'd been hesitant to host because my space was smaller than the others, but everyone assured me they were more interested in the company than the accommodation. This is perfect, my mother said. looking around my studio with its carefully arranged furniture and personal touches. It feels like you. What does that mean? It feels peaceful and intentional, like every choice was made for a reason. The description was accurate. At years of living in other people's spaces and accommodating other people's preferences, I'd been very deliberate about creating an environment that reflected my tastes and supported my well-being. I love having my own space. I love being able to control my environment and make decisions based on what works for me. Do you ever get lonely? Emma asked. Sometimes, I admitted. But it's a different kind of loneliness than what I felt when I was living with all of you. What do you mean? When I lived with you, I felt lonely because I was surrounded by people who didn't really see me or consider my needs. Now, when I'm alone, it's because I choose to be. And when I want company, I seek out people who value my presence. Like us, Jake said with a smile. Like you. Now that you value my presence instead of just expecting it. We spent the evening talking and laughing, sharing stories and making plans for future gatherings. The conversation flowed naturally, without the undercurrents of resentment and obligation that had characterized our interactions for so long. When they were getting ready to leave, my mother pulled me aside for a private conversation. I want you to know that I understand now what you did for us, she said quietly. You saved us from ourselves. I saved myself, I corrected. You all saved yourselves. We couldn't have done it without your example. You showed us that it was possible to stand up for yourself, to demand better treatment, to value your own well-being. I'm glad it worked out for everyone. Are you really? Are you glad we lost the house and had to start over? I considered the question seriously. A year ago, I would have said that I wished things could have been different, that we could have found a way to stay together and treat each other better. Now, I wasn't so sure. I'm glad we all became the people we needed to become, I said finally. I don't know if that could have happened any other way. I don't think it could have, she agreed. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for people you love is refuse to enable their worst impulses, even when it's painful for everyone involved, especially when it's painful for everyone involved. After they left, I cleaned up the dinner dishes and reflected on how much had changed in 12 months. We'd gone from being a dysfunctional family, held together by obligation and financial necessity, to being a functional family connected by genuine affection and mutual respect. The transformation hadn't been easy for any of us, and there had been moments during the crisis when I doubted my decision to let them face the consequences of their choices. But seeing where we all were now, seeing the pride and confidence that came from overcoming challenges independently, I knew it had been the right choice. Living in the closet had taught me what it felt like to be invisible and unvalued. Refusing to save the house had taught my family what it felt like to be responsible for their own choices. Both lessons had been necessary, even though they'd been painful. As I got ready for bed in my own space, in my own bed, with my own quiet and my own peace, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought us all to this point. We were still a family, but now we were a family by choice rather than by default, and that made all the difference. 2 years after the foreclosure, I received a phone call that would have been unimaginable during our crisis. Emma was calling to ask if I wanted to go house hunting with her. I've been pre-approved for a mortgage, she said, excitement bubbling in her voice. Nothing fancy, but it's enough for a small house with a yard for the kids. The transformation in her circumstances was remarkable. She'd been promoted twice more at work and was now managing a team of 12 people. Her salary had increased substantially, and she'd been diligent about rebuilding her credit and saving for a down payment. I want you to help me look at houses, she continued, because you're the only person I know who will tell me the truth about whether I can actually afford some. The request touched me deeply. During our years of dysfunction, Emma had never asked for my opinion on important decisions. Now she was explicitly seeking my perspective, because she valued my judgment and trusted me to have her best interests at heart. We spent the following Saturday touring 3 different houses in her price range. Emma had done her research thoroughly, calculating not just mortgage payments but also property taxes, insurance, maintenance costs, and utility expenses. She'd learned to think comprehensively about financial commitments, instead of just focusing on the immediate appeal of a purchase. This one has a great kitchen, she said as we walked through the second house, but the roof needs work within the next few years. I'd need to budget for that. You've really thought this through, I observed. I had to learn to think things through, she replied. Making impulsive financial decisions is what got us into trouble before. The house she ultimately chose was modest but well-maintained, with 3 bedrooms and a small backyard. It wasn't glamorous, but it was within her means and suited her family's actual needs rather than their aspirational wants. It feels like home, she said, as we stood in the empty living room after signing the purchase agreement. Not like the house I think I should have, but like the house that's right for my life. Jake had undergone an equally dramatic transformation, though his path had been different from Emma. He'd completed his landscape design certification and started his own business, Anderson Outdoor Designs, which was already booked solid through the following spring. I never thought I'd be an entrepreneur, he told me over lunch one afternoon. I always assumed I'd work for someone else and complain about not getting ahead. What changed your mind? Working for myself means I can't blame anyone else if I fail, but it also means I get full credit when I succeed. His business was thriving because he'd discovered he had both artistic talent and practical skills that he'd never had the motivation to develop when other people were supporting him. The work was physically demanding and required long hours, but he seemed energized rather than exhausted by the challenges. I'm thinking about hiring an assistant, he said. Maybe someone just starting out who wants to learn the trade. That's a big step. It is, but I want to give someone else the opportunity that forced independence gave me. He'd also been paying me back steadily, as promised. The monthly payments weren't large, but they arrived without fail, accompanied by brief notes updating me on his progress. He was about halfway through repaying what he owed, and I could see that each payment represented a commitment to being the kind of person who honors his obligations. My mother's life had stabilized in ways that surprised all of us. Her relationship with Harold had deepened into something serious and lasting, and they'd moved in together in a larger apartment within the same senior community. We're not getting married, she told me during one of our visits. At our age, there are legal and financial complications that make it easier to just live together. How do you feel about that arrangement? I feel like I'm finally living my life on my own terms instead of according to other people's expectations. She'd also become a leader in the senior community, organizing events and advocating for improvements to services and facilities. The volunteer work had given her a sense of purpose and accomplishment that she'd been missing since Dad died. I never realized how much energy I was putting into worrying about all of you, she said. Now that you're all taking care of yourselves, I have mental space for other things. Do you miss taking care of us? I miss being needed, she said honest, but I don't miss the stress of feeling responsible for everyone else's happiness and success. The distinction was important. She'd learned to separate loving us from managing us, caring about us from controlling us. The boundaries had been difficult to establish at first, but they'd ultimately made our relationships healthier and more sustainable. David and I had been dating for over a year, and our relationship had developed into something steady and meaningful. He'd met my family during one of our monthly dinners, and the evening had been comfortable and natural in a way that wouldn't have been possible during our crisis period. They seem like good people, he'd said afterward. They are good people, I'd replied. They just had to learn how to be good to each other, and you had to learn how to be good to yourself. The observation was astute. My relationship with David was healthy precisely because it was built on mutual respect and independence, rather than neediness or desperation. I'd learned to value myself enough to expect good treatment, and he'd never known me as anything other than a confident, self-sufficient person. We'd talked about moving in together, but we were taking our time with the decision. I'd grown to love my independence too much to give it up lightly, and he respected that boundary without making me feel guilty or pressured. I like that you have your own life, he'd told me. It makes the time we spend together feel chosen rather than obligated. On the second anniversary of the foreclosure, we decided to have a special family dinner to mark the occasion. This time we chose a restaurant rather than cooking at home, a small celebration of how far we'd all come financially and emotionally. 2 years ago, none of us could have afforded to eat here, Emma pointed out as we looked at the menu. 2 years ago, We couldn't have had a conversation this pleasant if our lives depended on it, Jake added. My mother raised her glass of wine. I want to propose a toast, she said, to learning that sometimes the best thing you can do for people you love is let them fall down and figure out how to get back up. We clinked glasses, and I felt a profound sense of satisfaction with how our family had evolved. We'd gone from being people who were related by blood but didn't particularly like each other, to being people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company and respected each other's choices. I have an announcement, Emma said after we'd ordered our meals. I've been seeing someone. My mother leaned forward with interest. Tell us about him. Emma described her new boyfriend, a teacher at her children's school who shared her interests in hiking and photography. They'd been friends for months before the relationship turned romantic, and she was taking things slowly while considering how dating would affect her children. He knows I'm a package deal, she said. The kids and I come together, and he's okay with that. How do the kids feel about him? They like him, but I've been clear that their needs come first, and he understands that. The approach was mature and thoughtful, so different from the impulsive decisions Emma had made in the past. She'd learned to consider long-term consequences instead of just immediate gratification. I'm happy for you, I said, and I meant it. Emma deserved a relationship with someone who respected her priorities and valued her independence. Jake had news too. He'd been accepted into a business management program at the local university, classes he could take in the evenings while continuing to run his landscaping business. I want to expand the company, he explained. Maybe hire a few employees, take on larger commercial projects. But I need to learn the business side of things first. That sounds like a smart plan. I never thought I was smart enough for college, he admitted. But running my own business made me realize I was capable of more than I thought. The conversation reminded me of something Dad used to say about potential being like a muscle that only grew stronger when it was challenged. All of us had discovered capabilities we'd never known we possessed, because we'd never been forced to develop them. As dinner continued, we talked about future plans and dreams in a way that felt optimistic rather than desperate. Emma was considering pursuing a master's degree in business administration. Jake was thinking about expanding his service area and possibly franchising his business model. My mother was planning to travel with Harold, visiting places she'd always wanted to see but had never prioritized when she was focused on managing everyone else's lives. What about you, Kathy? My mother asked. What are your dreams now? I thought about the question. For so long, my dreams had been simple and immediate. A real bedroom, financial security, respect from my family. Now that I had those things, I was free to want more ambitious goals. I'm thinking about starting my own accounting practice, specializing in helping small businesses and individuals who are rebuilding their financial lives. Like us, Emma said with a smile. Like us. I've learned a lot about financial recovery and family dynamics that I think could help other people in similar situations. You'd be good at that, Jake said. You have the technical skills and the personal experience. The idea had been developing in my mind for months. Working at Morrison & Associates had been excellent for rebuilding my career and confidence, but I was starting to feel ready for the challenge of building something of my own. I'm also thinking about writing, I continued. Maybe a book about family financial dynamics and the difference between helping and enabling. Would you write about us? My mother asked. I'd write about what we learned, about how sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to rescue people from their own choices. I'd read that book, Emma said. I think a lot of families could benefit from understanding those dynamics. After dinner, we walked to a nearby park and sat on benches overlooking a small lake. The evening was warm and peaceful, and for the first time in years, we were together without any undercurrent of tension or unresolved conflict. I want to say something, my mother said, as we watched ducks swimming in the fading light. I want all of you to know that I'm proud of who we've become. Even though we lost the house, Jake asked, especially because we lost the house. Losing the house forced us to find out who we really were underneath all the dysfunction and enabling. Do you think Dad would be proud of us? Emma asked. I think Dad would be amazed by how much we've grown, my mother replied. I think he'd say that we finally learned what he was trying to teach us all along. What was he trying to teach us? That love without accountability isn't really love at all. That the best families are the ones where everyone takes responsibility for their own choices and happiness. As the sun set over the lake, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this peaceful moment. 2 years ago, we'd been a family in crisis, held together by financial necessity and obligation, rather than genuine affection. Now we were a family by choice, people who valued each other's company and respected each other's independence. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. There had been months of pain and uncertainty, moments when I'd wondered if I'd made the right choice in refusing to enable their dysfunction. But seeing where we all were now, seeing the pride and confidence that came from overcoming challenges independently, I knew that every difficult moment had been necessary. "Thank you, Kathy," Emma said quietly as we prepared to leave the park. "For what? For loving us enough to let us fail. For believing we were capable of more than we were showing you. For teaching us that we were stronger than we thought," Jake added. "For showing us what healthy boundaries look like," my mother concluded. Their gratitude touched me deeply, but I also wanted them to understand the full truth of what had happened. "I didn't do any of this for you," I said gently. "I did it for me. I refused to enable you because I needed to respect myself, not because I was trying to teach you a lesson." "But it taught us a lesson anyway," Emma said. "It taught us that we were capable of taking care of ourselves," Jake agreed, "and that our relationship could survive honesty and boundaries," my mother added. "Maybe that's the real lesson, that doing what's right for yourself often ends up being what's right for everyone else too." As we walked back to our cars, I felt a deep sense of completion. The family that had fallen apart during our crisis had been rebuilt into something stronger and healthier than what we'd lost. We'd learned to love each other without enabling each other, to support each other without sacrificing ourselves. 6 months later, I opened Anderson Financial Recovery Services in a small office downtown. My first clients included several families dealing with foreclosure, bankruptcy, and financial crisis. Many of them reminded me of my own family during our difficult period. Good people who had lost their way and needed guidance to find a sustainable path forward. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying. I was able to use both my professional skills and my personal experience to help people rebuild their financial lives and their family relationships. Many of my clients were surprised to learn that financial recovery often required addressing underlying family dynamics and communication patterns. "Money problems are usually relationship problems in disguise," I would tell them. "Until you address the enabling and codependency issues, the financial problems will keep recurring." Emma, Jake, and my mother all became unofficial ambassadors for my practice, referring friends and neighbors who were struggling with similar issues. They'd learned firsthand that financial recovery was possible, even after hitting what felt like rock bottom. "Kathy saved our family by refusing to save us," Emma would tell people who asked about her recommendation. "She taught us the difference between helping and enabling." Jake had expanded his business and now employed 3 full-time workers. He'd also started a scholarship program for young people interested in landscape design, particularly those from families dealing with financial hardship. "I know what it's like to feel like you don't have options," he'd told me when he announced the scholarship. "I want to give kids opportunities that I didn't think I deserved when I was younger." My mother and Harold had gotten engaged, deciding that they wanted the legal protections and formal commitment of marriage, despite their earlier hesitations. The wedding was small and intimate, held in the garden at their senior community with just family and close friends in attendance. "I never thought I'd get married again," she told me as we shopped for her dress, "but Harold makes me want to build a future instead of just managing the present." "I'm happy for you, Mom. I'm happy for all of us. We've all learned how to build futures instead of just surviving crises." On the 3rd anniversary of the foreclosure, I was invited to speak at a conference for financial counselors about family dynamics and financial recovery. The presentation went well, and afterward, several people approached me about writing the book I'd mentioned to my family. "There's definitely a market for this," said one literary agent. "Too many financial advice books, focus on budgets and investments without addressing the relationship issues that cause money problems in the first place. I'd been working on the book proposal for months, using our family's story as a case study while protecting everyone's privacy. The central thesis was that financial enabling often masqueraded as family loyalty, and that true love sometimes required allowing people to experience the consequences of their choices. "What would you call it?" the agent asked. "The closet bedroom," I replied. "It's about what happens when families mistake dysfunction for loyalty, and how hitting bottom can actually be the foundation for building something better." A year later, the book was published to positive reviews and steady sales. I was invited to speak at conferences and workshops, sharing our story and the lessons we'd learned about healthy family financial dynamics. The response from readers was overwhelmingly positive, with many people writing to say that the book had helped them address similar issues in their own families. Emma had completed her MBA and was promoted to regional manager at her company. She'd also bought a larger house, one with enough space for her growing children and occasional visits from her boyfriend, who had become a stable presence in their lives. Jake's business had grown into a successful enterprise with multiple crews and commercial contracts. He'd paid me back in full with interest, and had started contributing to a college fund for Emma's children. My mother and Harold had taken several trips together, visiting national parks and historic sites they'd always wanted to see. They'd also become foster grandparents to children in their community, whose biological grandparents lived far away. David and I had moved in together, blending our lives in a way that felt natural and sustainable. We'd talked about marriage but were content with our current arrangement, two independent people who chose to share a life without losing their individual identities. 5 years after the foreclosure, we gathered at Emma's house for Thanksgiving dinner. The tradition had evolved from our monthly dinners into holiday celebrations that included our extended chosen family: David, Harold, Emma's boyfriend Mark, and Jake's girlfriend Sarah, whom he'd met in his business management program. "I want to say grace," my mother announced as we gathered around the table. We joined hands, something we'd never done during our dysfunctional years, but that had become a meaningful ritual in our recovered family. "We're grateful for this food, for this home, for this family," she began. "We're grateful for the lessons we learned the hard way, and for the strength we found when we thought we had none. We're grateful for each other, not because we have to be, but because we choose to be. Amen," we said together. As we served the meal that Emma had prepared with help from Mark and the kids, I reflected on how far we'd all traveled from the family that had lived in crisis and dysfunction just a few years earlier. We'd become people who could be genuinely grateful for our struggles, because we understood how those struggles had shaped us into better versions of ourselves. "Aunt Kathy," Emma's youngest daughter said as we ate dessert, "will you tell us the story about the closet bedroom?" The children had heard abbreviated versions of our family's transformation, age-appropriate stories about how sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and have to learn better ways to treat each other. "Once upon a time," I began, "there was a family that forgot how to take care of each other properly. They confused taking care of each other with taking from each other, and they confused loving each other with never saying no to each other." "What happened to them?" the little girl asked. "They had to lose their house to remember how to be a family," I continued. "And it turned out that losing the house was the best thing that could have happened to them, because it taught them that they were stronger and more capable than they had realized." "Did they get a new house?" "They got something better. They got new lives that they built for themselves, and they got to choose to be a family instead of just being stuck with each other." "Is this their new house?" she asked, looking around Emma's comfortable living room. "This is one of their new houses," I confirmed. "They all have their own houses now, but they choose to come together to share meals and stories and holidays." "That's a good story," she said solemnly. "It's a true story," I replied, "and the best part is that it has a happy ending that keeps getting happy." Later that evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, Emma pulled me aside for a private conversation. "I read your book again last week," she said. "The part about how you felt invisible when you lived in the closet. What did you think about it?" I realized that I'd been invisible too, in a different way. I was so focused on being taken care of that I forgot to take care of myself. I was so busy being a victim that I forgot to be a person. And now I know who I am when I'm not expecting someone else to solve my problem. Now I know what I'm capable of when I take responsibility for my own happiness. I'm proud of you, Emma. I'm proud of all of us. We figured out how to love each other without losing ourselves. As I drove home that evening, David beside me, in comfortable silence, I thought about the unexpected gifts that had emerged from our family crisis. We'd lost a house, but we'd gained respect for each other and for ourselves. We'd experienced financial ruin, but we'd learned to build sustainable prosperity. We'd faced the possibility of permanent estrangement, but we'd discovered what authentic family connection looked like. The closet bedroom had been a symbol of everything that was wrong with our family dynamics: the lack of respect, the taking for granted, the assumption that some people's needs mattered less than others. But it had also been the catalyst for everything that was right with our current relationships: the mutual respect, the genuine affection, the understanding that love required boundaries as much as it required generosity. I'd started that journey feeling powerless and invisible, sleeping in a space that wasn't really mine, and contributing to a household that didn't really value me. I'd ended it with a thriving business, a healthy relationship, and a family that chose to love each other instead of just tolerating each other. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick, but it had been complete. We'd learned that sometimes the most generous thing you can do for people you love is refuse to enable their dysfunction. We'd learned that true strength comes from taking responsibility for your own choices, rather than expecting others to rescue you from the consequences. Most importantly, we'd learned that family isn't just about blood or obligation. It's about choosing to show up for each other in healthy, sustainable ways. Looking back, I could see that the foreclosure notice had been the beginning of our recovery, not the end of our stability. It had forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our relationships. It had required us to develop strength and skills we didn't know we possessed. It had taught us the difference between helping and enabling, between love and codependency, between being family and choosing to be family. The closet bedroom was empty now, filled with someone else's belongings in someone else's house. But the lessons I'd learned while sleeping there had become the foundation for everything good that had followed. Sometimes you have to lose everything you think you need in order to discover everything you actually need. Sometimes the smallest space can teach you the most important lessons about taking up the space you deserve. And sometimes the best thing you can do for your family is refuse to save them, so they can learn to save themselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.